the Shop, episode 98. Today we're talking all about the closing shift. Well, hello everybody, and welcome to another episode of Keys to the Shop, where we give you insights, inspiration, and the tools you need to grow as a coffee service professional. My name is Chris DeFirio. I'm your host for the show, and I'm really happy you decided to join me on the show today. We're talking about the closing shift, which is just a great topic, I think, to really discuss the mindset that we have as we work in the cafe. There's a lot of ground to cover here. We're going to be talking about things like our mindset going into the shift, how administrators like managers or owners can set things up so that there isn't a division of labor that creates tension in the cafe, and then kind of what a good closing shift should have as a part of it. I'm a big fan of that shift. I have worked plenty of closing shifts and have found a real sweet spot in terms of how I view them and what the benefits are for them. So I hope that this one's going to be really helpful for you if you find yourself working closing shifts pretty often. I'm sure this is going to give you some motivation. So I do want to start today by giving a big thank you to our sponsors here at Keys to the Shop. And we're going to start with Prima Coffee. Now, Prima Coffee, they are a specialty coffee equipment supplier, and they're based out of Louisville, Kentucky, and that's where the show is based here. And from the time they opened their doors till now, their mission has been to provide both professionals and the general public the best coffee brewing equipment available. Their focus as a company is on curating the best equipment for every need that you could have. So if you need grinders or espresso machines or under-counter refrigeration, whether it's small or large, home or commercial, they can help you out. If you happen to be an owner and you're opening your second store and you need to supply that with equipment, this is the company that can help you. They put a big emphasis also on having the expertise in-house to help their customers get the right gear to fit every situation. So I highly encourage you to go and visit prima-coffee.com. Again, that's prima-coffee.com, and see how they can help you in your coffee journey, supplying you with the equipment that you need for that. Thank you, Prima, for your support of Keys to the Shop. Now, I'd also like to thank our sponsor, Pacific Foods. They're the ones behind the Barista Series line of non-dairy performance beverages, and those are designed specifically for the professional barista and the standards for excellence that they demand. So whether it's almond, soy, coconut, or rice, its ability to take the heat from steaming and produce an unmatched and silky texture, and also keep the flavor balance focused on coffee, makes it a perfect choice for your cafe's menu. Now, Pacific is a huge supporter of the specialty coffee industry and has been for quite a long time, and they demonstrate this by listening to and serving the needs of real specialty coffee professionals. So please go visit pacificfoods.com and look into the Barista Series line of non-dairy performance beverages and learn how the addition of the Barista Series to your cafe's menu can enhance the non-dairy offerings to your customers. So my thanks to Pacific for your support of Keys to the Shop. Okay, so today we are going to be talking about the closing shift. Everyone's favorite shift, right? Not really. Not necessarily, maybe not as much as it should be. And I hope to change your mind just a little bit today and change our perceptions around that. But I want to start by talking about how I see the cafe. And I think this is maybe not just how I see it, but how it actually is. The fact is that everybody contributes to the whole. Everyone, no matter what they do on the chore list or what shift they occupy, if you're working in the cafe producing great drinks and, whether you're stocking or pouring a Rosetta, you're doing something to further specialty coffee. And specialty coffee survives and thrives based on millions and millions of points of minutia being done over and over and over again on a daily basis. Even as you're listening to this podcast, there are literally millions of people partaking in the endeavor to, keep a business open, keep a customer happy, keep a tree on the farm alive, create a spreadsheet that accurately represents the offerings on a green buyer's offering list. There's so many little things that go into each of our jobs, and each thing is vital to the whole. And the philosophy that we should have, I think, as specialty coffee professionals is one that can find joy in the little things and know that it contributes to the whole. One way to think about this importance of all the little things is just pick any point in specialty coffee, any particular job that there is, and take all of the people that are occupying that position. You know for a fact that across the whole of those people, not everybody is giving 100% to that job for different reasons. But just imagine, just get creative and imagine if everyone did, if everyone was just on fire for that position and trying to do as good of a job as possible in that role, no matter how small it was. That collectively, that would send a ripple effect through the industry that would make things better. If every closer really cared about setting up the opening shift really well, think about how much better cafes would run and how maybe turnover would go down. There's just a lot of things that you could imagine when you take a small sample and then multiply it times the number of people who are partaking in that particular task. This is why, it's important to talk about these things, because we get into a point of hypnosis where we just do the shift, we go home. We do the shift, we go home. And we don't ever really lean into what we're doing as much as we possibly can. We just want to get out. And it becomes a game of seeing how quick you can get out of the close, and not necessarily how good of a job you can do while you're there. So I want to talk about how we can shift our perceptions about the closing shift. So I feel like we should talk about some of the common problems with a closing shift. And one of the things that I find is that there's a higher level of this feeling of detachment from the kind of real meat and potatoes, if you will, of the cafe life. Because for the bulk of us, the main time of business happens earlier in the day. So you might feel like because it's slow, it's not as busy during the night shift most of the time, or the closing shift, that you're missing out on that culture. And in some ways, I suppose you are missing out on that particular part. It's what we do, but it's, I think, what we do with that reality that creates an atmosphere that's either positive or negative. Isolation, obviously, is a big one where maybe no customers are coming in. It's just you and another barista, or if it's just you and your playlist, or you and the checklist, or whatever it is. You feel alone, and your motivation and excitement for coffee and for the company you work for is more likely to falter during those times. Another problem with the closing shift is it tends to be a shift that is a dumping grounds for management. What I mean by that is so many tasks get put into a closing checklist that don't get put into a mid-shift checklist or an opening checklist, which you should have all three, really. And in the creative mind of the manager that imagines this beautiful coffee shop that is like the perfect coffee shop, add maybe 3 more things to a list that's already 20 items long. And a lot of times the management doesn't really even think that hard about what it's going to be like to actually accomplish those things. What they think is, it's usually slower. I'm sure they're going to get it done. I'm sure. And not having closed very much themselves for the most part because they're busy with administrative tasks, or maybe they used to close, but that's when the store wasn't as busy. The empathy in creating those lists can tend to be on the low side. And so you feel like, I have to clean up after everybody. And there's all these tasks that other people just kind of like little openers walk in to my hard work. And this is not fair. So you feel overburdened. In another part of this closing shift that can be hard is that you become overly protective of your quote unquote, your space. You start to think of it as your bar because you've cleaned it so well, and customers come in, they kind of break that hypnosis of no customers. And it's almost as if you resent them for coming into the cafe. It's a weird vibe that you get. And I know this vibe. Yeah, I've had it where I get upset because my bar is really clean and I don't want to have to serve coffee. It's weird because at one point you're thinking, I wish I wasn't working the close so I could make more coffee. And then when you get a chance to make coffee, you're like, I don't want to make coffee. Anyway, here are some solutions to the problems that we have with the closing shift. I'm going to go through these and we're going to break it into 3 categories of solutions. First is mindset. Second is for administrators or managers in a coffee shop. And third is the execution of the actual shift itself, things that will help you have an amazing closing shift. So let's start with a mindset. We started this talk by talking about the philosophy of working in a coffee bar. Remember that you are contributing to something much, much larger than yourself. If you keep a broader perspective, it's less likely that you're going to start getting really upset about little things that might annoy you about how maybe the openers don't have as much to do. That may be a fact, but you get the reward of the character built during that hard work that an opener might not get. That is a reward in itself. And trust me, I've been through so many of these up and down emotional battles with feeling unfairly scheduled or burdened, and it's not fair, et cetera, et cetera. But the treasure that I have now is the skill set of patience, is the knowledge of my contribution to the whole. It's the work ethic that I've been able to develop that will serve me better in the long run, having done harder things, that I can then have an easier time when challenges present themselves later in my career. So when you're going through a hard time, if that is the closing shift for you, then consider it something that will build character and opportunity for you in the future, even though in the short term, it's not that glamorous position that you would hope for. Oftentimes, when you get what you want, you're shortchanging yourself of those skills that you could develop and that will help the future you in your coffee career or whatever career you happen to be going into. It might not even be coffee. So that's a good perspective, I think, going into it. Don't do the work simply just to get it over with and to spite the openers or do it with a grumpy attitude. Check your attitude, go in there serving the whole, the business itself, and the industry at large. And if you just attach yourself to that perspective, then you'll find nobility in the most mundane of tasks. So that's what I have to say about mindset. Transcend your circumstance. It can be summed up that way. Whatever it takes for you to transcend your circumstance, it's vital that you do that. Now, if you are a manager or a leader in a coffee bar, and I know that many of you that listen to Keys to the Shop either aspire to be or are currently in this position, the way that a barista perceives a shift ultimately can be steered by the way that you communicate about that shift and what you do with the schedule. So let's talk about a few things here. Number one, I think, is you personally need to know what it's like to do the work of the barista and do the closing shift. I talked earlier about how overburdened closers can feel sometimes because of arbitrary decisions made in an office by somebody who might be a little bit distant from the actual work. If that's you, you have the ability to make a difference and to go and experience the system that you've created for other people to live in. That's the first thing I would say. Go to the closing shift, be there, and be a present leader. You have your schedule. You have a weekly plan, hopefully in place as a manager. Plan out the time that you distribute your presence as the leader in that shop. If you're the owner or manager, whoever, if nobody sees you after 5 p.m., if nobody sees you from the closing shift, then the culture of your store is probably greatly different in the closing than it is in the opening. And that's common. That's like the first shift to turn sideways in a cafe is the closing shift, mainly because the bulk of the interaction with the public and other people in the business, the communication, the vision, all of that stuff, the leadership, it's really concentrated in the daytime, and then everybody checks out to go to the bar, go to a restaurant or home or whatever, and the closers are just kind of waving goodbye to everybody, and then, boom, they're by themselves. And it just kind of takes its own course. So if you're a leader, manage your presence. Take a couple hours and maybe do some work during a closing shift. This is the kind of thing that will greatly help people in seeing that you see them and you see what they're up against, and it's hard to talk to people who do closing shifts about closing shifts and their work if all you're doing is listening to hearsay about the work itself and not experiencing it, both the positive things that happen and the negative things. So be there. And I would also like to add for you, if you're a manager, that you need to be able to evenly distribute amongst the staff the responsibilities for opening and closing shifts, with a few exceptions of absolute restrictions on time where somebody says, I literally only want closing shifts. And I am completely fine with that. And that's all I have to do. Sometimes students are like that. That's a different scenario. But where you can, it's always best, in my opinion, to allow the staff to regularly experience what it's like to flip a shift. If somebody normally opens, have them close once or twice. Even if it's not completely even throughout the week, at least know that everybody knows what it's like to do these jobs. And that way, you're not going to get people disrespecting one another and creating these divisions between open and close, where each shift is backbiting against the other shift. You don't want that. And a great way to just cut that off at the pass is make sure everybody can empathize with what the other is going through and doing. So if you are tempted to just leave some task undone as a closer, but you know that there's this crazy rush in the morning that they have to deal with that you didn't realize was as hard to do as you thought, but you did it the other day and you realized how important it is to have a good setup to serve the public well. You're not going to do that again, or you're going to have a harder time making a decision to let it slide. And the same thing is true for you openers out there. You're not going to have such a blithe attitude about, we got crushed and we did I'm fried and I'm just going to leave all these dishes right here. And I'm sure it's okay. The closers really don't have that much to do, and there's not much business, so I'm just going to leave this. You're less likely to do that if you have worked a closing shift and you realize there are these rushes that happen in the afternoon where if you don't have any plates, if you don't have any spoons or demi-tasse cups, then you're sunk and you're just walking back between the dish sink and the bar because the openers just clocked out because they had a crazy rush, and for some reason they justified bouncing before the list was actually done. Now, this doesn't eliminate everything. This is where leadership comes in, of course. So you as a manager or leader need to make sure that each shift is setting up the next shift very, very well. So that means making it evenly distributed in terms of shifts, yes. What about how you distribute the chores that have to be done throughout the day? And do you follow up and make sure that people are actually doing those things? Are you sure that your mid-shift people are doing the things that are on their list to do? And how do you set up your system of follow-up is critical. So if you have to walk over from the office to the cafe to make sure that the transition from shift to shift is actually going well and people are checking off the items on the list appropriately, this is what you have to do, especially when you're just establishing a new system or a new list. It needs to be, for lack of a better term, policed a little bit to make sure that everyone's got it, and you're coaching people and making sure that they know what to do, and that it's not just all the closers' job to clean up the mess of the entire day, but that openers are also responsible, and that the mid-shift is also responsible, and the closing has their responsibilities. So distribute the load of work and chores throughout the day appropriately. Now, the closing shift will inevitably have more cleaning because you can't do some of these things while you're in business, while you're open. That's just the way it is. And that's the character building part of the closing shift, amongst other things. Now, another thing, managers, about the distribution of closing shifts amongst the staff, there is in coffee a punitive nature of closing shifts, where if somebody is being punished for something, they'll be given the closing shift because it has less tips, because it has more physical labor and less coffee. And so by virtue of this practice, where we kind of reinforce this idea that the closing shift is punishment, people will actually perform worse in those positions. Do not use the closing shift as punishment. Don't make it punitive. You need all of the people to be 100% in their position, no matter where it is. If you've got a performance issue with an employee, you have to deal with that through other means other than the passive-aggressive punishment through, only having these shifts. That is not cool, and I really hope that you cease doing that if that's something you find yourself doing. People who are working for you need to be coached. They need leadership for sure, but that is not a good leadership practice, in my opinion. Each shift should be given respect and should be treated with respect, especially by management. So those are some of the things that you can do if you're a leader in the coffee bar and you want to set up your staff for success, especially in the closing shift. There are a few things to live by that I have found lead to success. So now let's talk about working the shift itself. When you enter a closing shift, there can be a lot of inertia that you have to work through to get to a good place and get to a good flow and execute a great close. So the first thing is you should arrive to work a little bit early to gauge the feel of the cafe and what's going on. Look at how people are, conversing. Is the cafe full? Are the tables empty? Are the tables full of things that need to be bussed? Do the staff behind the bar look really nerve-wracked and busy? Like, there's a vibe in the cafe that you are entering into. That atmospheric drag is that inertia, it just makes it harder for you to transfer in. You've had a whole day almost. I don't know when your closing shift starts, but you've had a whole morning at least of activity and thoughts, and now maybe you're not even at your second wind yet. So arriving early helps you get into the right headspace in order to enter into this atmosphere appropriately without burning up on entry, which I have done several times when I just roll out into the cafe and I don't prepare myself at all. It just all hits you at once, and it's just, for me, sometimes it's just too much. So I think that's helpful. Also, when you clock in, get the information you need from the people that have been working during the day. Ask them how it's been. If there's information that they have to tell you about items that we might be out of. If there's a tab that's open on the register that you're not aware of, that you need to be aware of when they come up and pay. These are things that need to be told to you. And oftentimes, even though it might be the job of the opener to tell you what is going on in the cafe and transfer that information like a baton over to you, the information might not be transferred because they just might forget. It depends on how busy the day was, and people, their minds just might be like over caffeinated, undernourished, and simply forget to tell you about that open tab or the milk shortage or the left steam wand or whatever it is. I would encourage you, if you're a manager, provide some kind of a standard for communication that everybody is responsible for. That will help this greatly. But if you're a closer and you're going in, make sure you get the information you need. If it's not offered to you, just say, is there anything I need to know? What about this? What about this? What about this? Right? So now when you get into your position, you find your groove, get everything set up, get your shift space clean and orderly. You might need to replace some towels. You just get your mise en place in place, everything in its place, and get yourself in a good position to think clearly, to serve well. Now that you're there and you've served some drinks and you've, become more comfortable with where you are in the cafe, you can start checking the lists and the chores and get yourself ready to start knocking those down one by one in a particular order. And here's the thing, you're just going to have pockets of time. There's big tasks and there's small tasks. Usually you're going to want to start with the small ones, especially going to want to start with the ones that do not interfere with the hospitality of your cafe. Things like mopping the cafe, for instance. You might think that you can get ahead by doing that like 2 hours before close, but nobody wants to walk into a cafe and smell Simple Green all over the place and try to enjoy the terroir of your coffee. It's not pleasant. It's not something that you should do until you're actually closed, my opinion, but I think it makes a lot of sense. So the less of an impact that it has on the experience that the guest has or your ability to do your job, the more likely it is that you should be doing that early in your closing shift. And that's just all pre-close. You can start pre-closing as soon as you start your shift. Get in the mindset of, like, I'm in a closing shift. Don't save it all to the end. You're just going to have pockets of time to do these things. So maybe you have a big task, like you need to do inventory, and you need to count all of the beans on the shelf. Now, you and I know that can be done, but it takes a long time. In that case, you can just do it in small chunks. But if it's something like Windexing a window or a door or something like that, sanitizing the back bar surface, that kind of stuff can be done, and it can be done in a few minutes, and you can get that done ahead of time. So work in order of small to large, if you can, and also in order of what interferes least with coffee experience and your ability to serve to that which is most, which is usually saved for after you've actually closed your cafe. And this is a good time to remind you that you can get into a groove of cleaning and making the place sparkle, and you get into this place where it's almost like you're not working in this cafe anymore. You're working on your own projects, and then a customer comes in again, and there's this snap back to reality, like, oh yeah, I'm still open. You need to constantly remind yourself that you're not just working in a vacuum here. You're still open. You're still serving, and at any moment, a guest might interrupt you. And I even hate to use the word interrupt, but if they need you to make them a drink, we've got to make sure that we aren't like somehow surprised that they want to do this. I mean, yeah, it's not going to get you out of there any sooner, and I don't think that should necessarily be your goal. So if you've set up an arbitrary goal for yourself to be out in 10 minutes after close, you're setting yourself up for disappointment and frustration. Hold those things with an open hand. Start your shift with the knowledge that in the executing of these checklists and the cleaning tasks and the stocking and all of the other things that accompany the closing shift, there is still service and there are still drinks being made. And that is the primary task. still, as long as the open sign is on. And this is where closing is a unique shift, because openers don't necessarily need to remind themselves of that. You do. Because of the nature of the shift, it's almost like you need to think about service more than other people. And in that way, I think it's easier for you to become more of a disciplined hospitality professional than other people who are simply in the mix of a heavy rush of people. Now, you're maybe more aware of hospitality and the nuances of hospitality because you have time to actually think about it. So this is a good opportunity, not only to build character through the work of closing, but also to build character of mindset towards hospitality and the people who come to the cafe. So those are some tips for you closers out there. Some of these things I think you might already know, but maybe need some reminding. I certainly do myself. And having, freshly just closed the cafe, I find myself weaving in and out of doing well and doing poorly, and maybe doing well a couple of more times than before. And slow progress is progress nonetheless. If you could just do a little bit better than you did before, then you're in a good spot. You're not going to nail this every single time. You might just fall into that, here comes a customer and they're just going to make me have to mess up this group head again. Or I'm going to have to, this sauce pump has just been cleaned and I just didn't want it to be dirty and they want a mocha. Perfect. So yeah, I can be that way myself, and, more times than I care to be. But if I'm aware of it, which I am, I can do something about it, which I do. And I get better and better as I go. I've been doing coffee for maybe about 20 years now, almost 20 years. And, and problems will always be there. Challenges will always be there. And the best that we can do is to embrace the challenge and continue to grow. And one of the best ways to do that is to work a closing shift with a mindset for excellence. And I hope that some of the things that we talked about in this episode were helpful to getting you there. These are some things that just kind of roll around my mind, and I've seen help me and other people do a good job at this particular shift. And, honestly, any shift would benefit from this mindset of contributing to the whole. No matter what you do, again, you are contributing to the success of specialty coffee as an industry, because it all comes down to that one moment where somebody takes a sip of coffee in the cafe and either loves their experience or doesn't. That's it. That's what it comes down to. And so, yes, we have to scrub the floor. Yes, we have to stock cups and take inventory. We've got to do dishes. We've got to back flush. We've got to sweep. We've got to pull that hairball off the bottom of the broom. Just all the little gross things that we have to do day in and day out is vital to the success of specialty coffee. So thank you for listening. I really appreciate your time. If you want the notes for this episode, all you have to do when you go to keystotheshop.com, on the sidebar, there is a place for you to enter your email address. And when you do enter your email address, you'll be signed up to receive a weekly newsletter that has the show notes, which is a summary of kind of a bullet point format summary of the main points made in each episode, as well as the links discussed in the conversation with either a guest or just talking about things between you and I on these solo episodes. So yeah, that's pretty easy. Just put your email address in there. And in addition to the show notes in the email, there will also be news about Keys to the Shop upcoming events like Coffee Fest coming up in LA, August 18th through the 21st. I'll be speaking there, judging latte art, as well as information about upcoming opportunities to work with me in consulting or training through Keys to the Shop Consulting. So if you want more information about working with me at Keys to the Shop Consulting for your business, or you want to just reach out to me about the podcast with feedback or comments and ideas, things like that, you can reach me by emailing chris@keystotheshop.com. And that's it for today's show. Thank you for joining me. I hope that this was helpful to you. And of course, I always hope that this has truly given you keys to the shop.